In the heart of Africa, a conflict brewed that would forever change the course of history for millions of people. The Nigerian Civil War, also known as the Biafran War, is a story of identity, survival, and a fight for self-determination. But how did a nation with so much promise fracture into chaos? Let's take you on a journey through the untold story of Biafra. The Nigerian Civil War, which lasted from 1967 to 1970, was one of the most devastating and complex conflicts in Africa's post-independence history. A war that tore a young nation apart, it was defined by political struggle, ethnic tensions, and one of the deadliest famines in modern history. But at its heart was a simple desire: to survive. Before we dive into the war itself, it's crucial to understand the dynamics of Nigeria prior to the conflict. Nigeria gained its independence from Britain in 1960, but it quickly became clear that managing the country's diversity would be a major challenge. The country was divided into three major regions: the northern region, dominated by the Hausa Fulani people and predominantly Muslim; the western region, home to the Yoruba people and diverse in culture and religion; and the eastern region, the heartland of the Igbo people, who were a powerful ethnic group with a distinct culture and language. These three regions, though culturally rich, were not united under one common identity. Political power struggles, fueled by regionalism and ethnic loyalty, created an atmosphere of instability. The eastern region, while rich in resources, especially oil, felt politically and economically sidelined. The Igbo population, who were largely in the east, began to grow disillusioned with what they perceived as a government that ignored their needs and concerns. The stage was set for a major conflict. The first serious rupture in Nigeria's fragile political system occurred in January 1966. A group of young military officers, largely from the Igbo ethnic group, orchestrated a coup that overthrew the government. Prime Minister Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, along with several other prominent political leaders, was assassinated. The coup was seen as an effort to remove corrupt leadership and restore order, but its aftermath would be catastrophic. The retaliatory coup in July 1966, led by northern military officers, further deepened the ethnic divisions. In the wake of the coup, thousands of Igbos living in the north were massacred. This gruesome violence, which saw the murder of thousands of innocent people, left the Igbo people feeling vulnerable and betrayed. With no protection from the central government, the East began to contemplate secession as the only way to ensure their survival. On May 30th, 1967, in response to the continued violence and the perceived failure of the Nigerian government to protect the Eastern people, Lieutenant Colonel Odumegwu Ojukwu, the military governor of eastern Nigeria, declared the eastern region an independent republic, Biafra. This was not a decision made lightly. For the people of Biafra, secession was a means of preserving their culture, their people, and their way of life. They had suffered massacres, discrimination, and political exclusion. The leaders of Biafra believed that if they remained part of Nigeria, they would continue to face violence and marginalization. While many in the East celebrated the birth of Biafra, the Nigerian government was resolute in its opposition. The federal government, led by General Yakubu Gowon, viewed the secession as a direct threat to the unity and stability of Nigeria. The stage was set for war. On July 6, 1967, the Nigerian army launched a full-scale military operation to crush the secessionist state of Biafra. The first shots of the Civil War rang out, and the world was thrust into one of the most brutal conflicts of the 20th century. Biafra, despite its small size and limited resources, was determined to defend its independence. The initial phase of the war was marked by heavy fighting along the borders, and Biafran forces managed to secure significant territory. The Nigerian military, with superior firepower and international support, soon gained the upper hand. However, the Biafrans did not surrender easily. They were fighting not just for territory, but for their right to exist as a nation. The Biafran struggle became a symbol of resistance and sacrifice. Despite facing overwhelming odds, the Biafran people showed extraordinary resilience. The war was fought not only by soldiers but by civilians, with women, children, and the elderly all contributing to the war effort. Biafran military leaders like Ojukwu became icons of hope, and their soldiers became legendary for their bravery. In many villages, civilians took up arms, helping to defend their homes and communities from Nigerian troops. The Igbo people, united by the cause of survival, put up a fierce fight, hoping that the world would recognize their right to self-determination. But the war was taking a heavy toll on the Biafrans. They lacked the weapons, technology, and international support that Nigeria had. Despite this, their resolve remained unbroken. The fight for Biafra became about much more than just the war. It was a struggle for identity, recognition, and survival. As the war raged on, the Nigerian government imposed a strict blockade on Biafra, cutting off vital supplies, including food and medicine. The blockade resulted in one of the most tragic humanitarian disasters of the 20th century. Starvation became the weapon of choice in the war, as millions of Biafrans faced famine. The world watched in horror as images of starving children flooded international media. Aid was slow to arrive, and the relief efforts were hampered by the blockade. By 1968, malnutrition had become widespread, with children and the elderly suffering the most. While the Nigerian military continued its assault on Biafra, the world looked on, powerless to stop the devastation. Estimates suggest that over 3 million people died during the war, many of them from starvation and preventable diseases. The humanitarian crisis became a symbol of the war's cruelty, and the Biafran people were left to suffer in silence. While the Nigerian Civil War was primarily a conflict between Nigerians, it was also a battleground for international interests. The Nigerian government, seeking to maintain its territorial integrity, was backed by the British, Soviet Union, and other global powers, who provided military aid, equipment, and political support. On the other hand, Biafra, despite its lack of international recognition, found support from countries like France and several African nations, as well as humanitarian organizations. Though Biafra had its supporters, they were unable to secure enough aid to break the Nigerian blockade. The international community's role was a controversial one, with many critics accusing foreign powers of prioritizing their own political and economic interests over the human cost of the war. Despite the human suffering, the global powers refused to intervene decisively, resulting in the war dragging on for years. After nearly 3 years of brutal fighting, Biafra was finally defeated. In January 1970, Biafran forces, exhausted and decimated by the blockade, surrendered to the Nigerian military. The war officially ended, and Biafra was reintegrated into Nigeria. However, while the war may have ended on paper, the emotional and psychological scars remained. The war had taken an immense toll on both sides, but the human suffering in Biafra was unparalleled. The loss of life, the destruction of communities, and the trauma caused by famine left deep wounds that would take decades to heal. The Nigerian Civil War left an indelible mark on the country. While Nigeria remained united, the war revealed the deep ethnic and regional divisions that continued to plague the nation. The Igbo people in particular have never fully recovered from the trauma of the war, and the legacy of Biafra remains a sensitive and painful subject. The conflict also had far-reaching consequences for Nigeria's political landscape. The war led to greater centralization of power in the federal government, and many regions continued to feel marginalized. Though efforts have been made to rebuild the country, ethnic and political tensions still simmer beneath the surface. The Biafran War serves as a powerful reminder of the costs of conflict, the fragility of unity, and the importance of dialogue and reconciliation in a diverse nation. The story of Biafra is not just a history of war, it's a story of survival, sacrifice, and the unbreakable will of a people determined to keep their identity alive. Though the Nigerian Civil War ended over 50 years ago, the lessons of the Biafran conflict are still relevant today. The war may have officially ended, but the echoes of Biafra's struggle for survival still resonate in the hearts of many. If you want to explore more stories like this and uncover history's forgotten narratives, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Stay tuned for more.